My therapist says that change is good. I don't agree with him because I think change is scary and it gives me panic attacks at night. However, when it comes to music, change is really good. In fact, I've always been interested, both as a listener and as a producer, in sounds that are constantly evolving and morphing into different things. I think it kind of just keeps my squirrel brain engaged at all times. Whether we're talking about drums or basses or keys or what have you, I'm going to show you a technique that helps you do just that. Create some nice morphing, evolving sounds. Let's get to it, shall we? So first of all, I'm going to show you this technique using drums, and I have a bunch of drum breaks here. They all sound different, but the pattern is basically the same. So I programmed these in such a way that it kind of follows the same pattern that goes to da, 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 if that makes sense. Let me just show you. So as you can hear, there's some variation here and there, but it's basically the same pattern, it's just different sounds. So the first thing that we're going to do is open up our browser and look for a simpler. And here it is. And we're going to drag maybe break number 1 into the simpler. And we are going to select slice mode, and we're going to slice by beat. And we're going to change the subdivision to 1/8. And maybe we turn warp on as well. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to press Command G or Control G on a Windows, and that's going to group it into an instrument rack. And this puts this particular drum break into a chain. Now what we can do is we can duplicate this, and we can drag maybe break number 2 into chain number 2. And as you can see now, we have our second break. We need to again slice it by beat and change the division to 1/8. Now, the reason why it's very important to keep the same pattern in these drum breaks is that now if I play C1, that's going to be a kick both in kit number 1 and drum kit number 2. If I play C sharp 1, it's going to be a hi-hat both here and here, and so on and so forth. If I play D, it's going to be a snare in kit number 2. And so basically having the same pattern in these drum breaks gives us the consistency that when we play one note, we expect, you know, a kick or a snare or a hi-hat or a ghost note or whatever in all of these drum kits. But moving on, here is where the magic starts happening. If we go into chain and we drag this all the way and this all the way as well, we can then create a fade like so on kit number 1 and a fade like this on kit number 2. And then if we take it one step further, we activate the macros and then we press map. And now we can map this chain selector to macro number 1, which means that now I have a continuous fade between the two drum kits. So now listen to what happens if I keep playing the kick drum and move this knob around. You have a continuous blend between the two sounds. Now let me just go ahead and create a pattern real quick. We have a pattern right now, and as I move through the chain, you can hear it morphing into something else. But once again, why stop here? What we can do now is we can minimize this and then group it once again. And that basically puts our full instrument rack into another chain. And then we can go ahead and duplicate that as well. And now the second chain that we have, we can go in and we can drop some more drum breaks. Put number 5 and number 8. Conveniently, our chains are already set up, so now what we need to do is go ahead and again change the slice mode into beat, division 1/8 So once again, it's not only important that these breaks kind of follow the same pattern, but also that they are, divided, sliced by the same kind of subdivision, which is 1/8. In that way, we are sure that every time, again, we hit a kick, it's going to be a kick. Every time we hit a snare, it's going to be a snare. But anyway, the next thing that we're going to do is go into the main instrument rack, activate the macros, and then now again, we go into chain, and now we're gonna create the same situation that we created for the drum breaks number 1 and 2 and the drum breaks number 3 and 4. But now, instead of fading between single drum kits, we are fading between groups of drum kits. So now we have group of 1 and 2, and this is group of 3 and 4. And once again, we need to adjust this like so. We can map this here. Now I'm gonna call it Y. I'm gonna call this parameter Y, and I'll explain why I'm calling it Y in just a second. This parameter I'm gonna call X, and I'm gonna map this to the actual chain selectors within the two groups, if that makes sense. Let me just show you. Okay, I'm gonna map this like so, and then I'm gonna select group 3 and 4 and map this on the same macro. And again, I'm gonna call this X. All right, so why did I call these encoders X and Y? Well, because it really helps visualizing this as a square. So basically, I'm just gonna call this a TETRA drum sort of situation going on. So if you visualize it as an X and Y pad, if that makes sense, if we move encoder X, so on the X axis, basically all this does is switch between either break 1 and break 2 or break 3 and break 4. In fact, as I move this, you can see that it's now switching between break 3 and break 4 and break 1 and break 2. So it's now, middle of the way, as you can see. But now Y is all the way down to 0. So basically, if I press play now and just move the X value, you're only gonna hear drum break 1 and drum break 2. Let me just show you. But as I move the Y encoder, you're gonna start hearing drum breaks 3 and 4 bleeding in. So now if I put everything at the value of 64, which is right in the middle, you're gonna hear all 4 drum breaks playing at the same time. And so the Y encoder kind of switches between the group 1, 2, and 3 and 4, and the X encoder switches between 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, if that makes sense. So in this particular case, we don't need 8 macros, so I'm just gonna delete the ones that I don't need. And why not? I'm just gonna make it pretty colors like so. So now that we have our X and Y encoders, you can pretty much modulate them any way you see fit. For example, you can put an LFO, and like so. You can map it to X, for example, and you can play around with the values and maybe turn it down a little bit. Like so. I'm just going to put it straight in the middle, turn the depth down a little bit. And maybe for the Y axis, you can use a different modulator. For example, I don't know, you can use a shaper, like so. Let me just map it. So when I modulate this with some external modulation like LFOs or shapers, I find it really useful to use kind of really long times. If you got into very high frequencies, you can get some really gnarly sort of sounds out of it. Also, the one thing to notice about LFO, it doesn't retrigger every time you press play. So basically, it is technically synced to 145 BPM if I press on this button right here. But the beginning of the wave of the LFO won't start at the beginning of the beat. And so one thing that I prefer to do is actually into my MIDI clip, I just go into envelopes and I go into my instrument rack, and I have my X and Y controls right here. And when you get into this section right here, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can draw some stuff like this. You can press B, and then that will turn your mouse into a pencil and do crazy stuff like this, for example. Let me just do a sine wave all over the thing, like so, yeah. Of course, now I'm just working with a very short MIDI clip, but you can make it as long as you want, and you can really create some like really long evolving sort of morphing drums. And yeah, maybe in a 8-bar pattern, it would just start slowly morphing into a different sound, and you know, you can do whatever you want with this. And lastly, one other way you can control these encoders is that there is a device called X and Y pad. I think it's a Max for Live device. Yeah. So basically, if you go here, you can map X here and Y here, and you can do this stuff. So if you have like a MIDI controller, kind of like a Chaos pad or something, or you can just use the mouse, you can record the automation like this, and it's pretty fun. So that's pretty much it. So the cool thing about this technique is that it doesn't only work with drums, you can use it with pretty much everything else. And in fact, we're gonna use it with some bass right now. So I'm gonna insert another MIDI track, and gonna get a simpler, and I'm gonna start adding some bass one over here. I'm gonna group it, audio chain, new chain, and I'm gonna put bass 2 in here. And just rename this. I'm gonna go into our chains again, and then we are gonna do a classic fade between chains. One thing that we need to change is the voicing. This is a bass, so I just want mono. So one voice. Next, we're gonna open up our macros, and we're gonna map the chain selector. Okay, so for this particular sound, we're not only gonna map the chain selector, but we're gonna map some other values as well. For example, I really wanna be able to control the glide on all of these basses. And so if I select glide time, and I'm gonna map it right here, I'm then gonna right click on here, and I'm gonna map to all siblings. So basically now, if I go to bass 2, this is also being mapped. And I'm gonna do the same for the filter frequency. Just go to bass 1. So I'm gonna map the filter frequency, and I'm gonna map to all siblings. I'm gonna map the filter resonance, and I'm gonna map to all siblings. And then I'm also gonna map the amount of the envelope right here, and I'm gonna map it to all siblings. So now if I exit map mode, one thing I didn't do is actually turn the glide on, so I need to make sure that I do just that. Also, I'm gonna switch the filters from clean to MS2, cause it's good and fun. And now I have this bass sound that I can switch. I have a filter frequency. I have the envelope that can go up. I have the filter resonance on both filters. And I have my glide time. And that's pretty much it. So now I can actually turn off some macros and I can group this, and once again I can boom duplicate this. And now instead of bass 1 and bass 2, I'm gonna drop bass 3 and bass 4 in here. I'm gonna have to rename these bass 3 and bass 4. Now unfortunately the only settings that are saved from the previous chain is the chain selector over here, so we're gonna have to go ahead and change once again all the settings over here. Everything sorted. We need to rename this 1 and 2, and we rename this 3 and 4. Open up a chain once again, do our fades, and then once again we open up our macros and we map this here, call it white. We map this here as well as this here, and we call it X. And then we go ahead and map all of these other parameters. So glide time, and let me see if it maps to all siblings. Yeah, it does. Very nice. So I'm gonna map filter frequency here. I'm gonna map to all siblings. Then I'm gonna map filter resonance and map to all siblings again. And so now we should be good to go. Yeah, everything works fine. Let me just delete a couple of these, and I'm gonna color the rest of these because it's fun. Don't you see how much fun I'm having? Right, I was joking, but I'm actually having a lot of fun. Anyway, let's have a listen to this monstrosity that we created. This sort of, let me just rename it, TETRA bass. So I've created a very simple clip for this bass. And now I can just copy and paste this into the arrangement view, like so. I'm gonna start playing with the automations of the X and Y axis. We're gonna turn the automation on. Maybe automate the filter frequency as well. As I said before, this technique is not only limited to drums, but also bass or any kind of other sound that you want. In fact, I went ahead and made another instance of this kind of TETRA instrument, and I put some chords in it. Obviously you could put single notes and you could play those single notes polyphonically in a simpler, or you could put whatever synth you want. You could put like 4 instances of like analog or drift or any other kind of VST or audio unit that you want, as long as your CPU kind of can take it. But in my case, I actually just went ahead and put some 4 more simplers, and I put some chords. And remember when we were talking about drums, I was saying that we need to be consistent in our choice of the pattern. I mean, the pattern needs to stay the same for all the breaks. Well, something kind of similar goes on here. We need to have the same chord for all the sounds that we use. In fact, here I'm using 4 different sounds, but they are all the same chord. In this case, it's a C minor 7, and some of them I've added a 9th. I think all of them have a 9th added, so they're pretty much exactly the same chords. Let me just check. Yeah, they're all C minor 7th 9. So this is what it sounds like. And if we go on the y-axis, the cool thing about this technique is that you can also add different effects at the end of each chain. So right here on chord number 4, I actually put a phaser flanger, and on chord number 3, I put a small delay, and chord 1 and 2 I think I kept pretty much dry. As you probably heard already, some of these are kind of short chords and some of these are kind of longer chords, and so as I sweep through the X and Y axis I can get a difference in tonality, but also difference in the length of the actual sample that we're playing. And going back on the bass instrument, I actually created a new TETRA bass. I called it TETRA Bass 2, and I added some of these effects as well on some of these bass sounds. I also went ahead and created a second TETRA drums kind of preset, and in this case I actually used some very diverse breaks, so when I sweep through the X and Y axis you will be able to tell the difference much more than TETRA drums 1. Anyhow, I also kept the previous drums and bass that we already made. I'm gonna put the whole project file on my Patreon, and this way you can save all of these presets. You can save TETRA drums 1, TETRA bass 1, TETRA drums 2, TETRA bass 2, and TETRA chord, and yeah, you can use them in your projects as well. Anyway, enough with this peddling my sample packs and presets bullshit, and let's have a listen to what these three sound like together. So as you can see, I've created an arrangement, and we are in automation view, so hopefully you will see how these X and Y values change over time for all three of these presets, and that will give you a visual indication of how the sound also morphs and evolves and changes over time. So yeah, let's have a listen. So that's pretty much it for today. I really hope you try this technique with your own sounds and instruments. And once again, if you can't be bothered to do that, just go to my Patreon page and download the presets that I already made for you. And yeah, that's it pretty much. And see you next time. Yeah, bye bye.